Welcome to the Natural Podcast of Selborne, hosted by Gilbert White's House and Gardens. I am Kimberley James, the collections manager here at Gilbert White's House. I love Gilbert White, but wish I knew a little bit more about the natural world he describes. So, every fortnight we take a deep dive into Gilbert White's pioneering 1789 book, The Natural History of Selborne, to learn more about the natural world, both in the 18th century and today. We will talk to some amazing experts and all become a little more Gilbert. Among the singularities of this place, the two rocky, hollow lanes, the one to Alton and the other to the forest, deserve our attention. These roads running through the marmlands are, by the traffic of the ages and the fretting of water, worn down through the first stratum of our freestone, and partly through the second, so that they look more like watercourses than roads, and are bedded with a naked rag for furlongs together. In many places they are reduced 16 or 18 feet beneath the levels of the fields, and after floods and in frosts exhibit very grotesque and wild appearances, from the tangled roots that are twisted along the strata, and from the torrents rushing down their broken sides, and especially when those cascades are frozen into icicles, hanging in all the fanciful shapes of the frostwork. These rugged, gloomy scenes affright the ladies when they peep down into them from the paths above, and make timid horsemen shudder while they ride along them, but delight the naturalist in their various botany, and particularly with their curious fallacies, which they abound. Hello, we are looking at letter 5 today, and we'll be doing something a little bit different. I have decided that we are going to practice what we preach. I am going to leave the office. I've got to leave the museum. The sun is shining for once. I'm recording this in February, and obviously I'm hoping that as you're listening to this in March, it's been nothing but glorious spring weather. But if you cast your mind back to the beginning of February, we have had nothing but rain for a long time. So these odd days of sunshine feel utterly miraculous. So I'm taking my opportunity whilst I have it. There is no guest today, so you are stuck with me, and we are going to head out into the natural world of Selborne. Letter 5 is an intriguing letter. It starts fairly traditionally for the Natural History of Selborne with a very dramatic description of the hollow lanes, which you will have just heard. I love hollow lanes or holloways or sunken lanes, however you know them. And you find quite a lot of them around these parts if you're driving around this corner of Hampshire, or I mean this part of the country really. You'll see them, the sort of more rural you get. These are ancient roads, as Gilbert explains, that have been worn down by centuries of traffic, and are quite dramatically lower than the fields and woodlands either side of them. In the 18th century, these two roads were the only ways in and out of the village, meaning that if you've had weather like we have had with, really, really heavy rain, and we've been suffering with our modern roads with potholes and flooding. In Gilbert White's day, there would be completely, there would be rivers in the hollow lanes, and Selborne would be blocked off from the rest of the world. You wouldn't be able to easily get in or out of the village. And there are references to the struggles that people had to getting to Selborne, even in Gilbert White's day. Gilbert White's bestie, John Mulso, references the fact he's coming to visit Gilbert on one occasion, and he says that basically he's going to get himself as far as Alton, And then from there, somebody needs to fetch him because he will not do that last leg of hollowed lanes and rural roads that are not um, well looked after without a Selbornian to guide him on his way. And the lanes also made Selborne basically invisible. If you were traveling through Selborne, if you were traveling through Hampshire, um, you could very much easily pass the road to Selborne without knowing that you had done so. And that's something that William Cobbett in his Rural Rides references to. He's being driven by someone, and the coach driver sort of says, "Oh, down there, that's Selborne, where Gilbert White lived." And Cobbett is a local boy. I mean, he's only in Farnham, which is not very far away at all. And he had absolutely no idea. He hadn't seen Selborne at all. The Selborne Road is a 19th century addition. It was built, I think, in 1847 and is now a very, very busy stretch of road and goes right through the middle of Selborne. So we sort of have the opposite issue today, where actually the Selborne is very, very accessible by road, and we have a very busy, very noisy road rattling through the village. Um, the lanes that Gilbert White are mentioning, the two lanes, one to Alton and one to the forest. The one to Alton is the most, I think, probably difficult to track. It starts in the village, it links up Gracious Street, and then it followed, I think, a similar route to the Selborne Road today, and then it broke off, I think, where Norton Farm is, and was at the time, and heads towards Hartley Maudit and towards Alton that way. And if you are ever driving through Hartley Maudit, you get very, very, very good sunken lanes, and you get to see a little bit of what Gilbert means about the how the roads were. There are some very, very good examples of sunken lanes there that you can drive through or walk through. And then towards the road, I think either Honey Lane or Sotherington Lane towards Blackmore. Um, Sotherington Lane in particular has some very, very good sunken lanes with twisted trees, with all the roots exposed and ferns, just as Gilbert White describes. So today, I think I'm going to try and avoid as many cars as I can and stick closer to the village, um, and go for a little bit of a wander. So Gilbert then goes on to tell us about the different sides of Selborne, the manor, the parish, and the villages themselves. I don't really expect on my walk to see many of the birds or mammals that Gilbert describes being present on the manor of Selborne. I'm not expecting to see any hares, not because I don't think there are hares around here, but the time of day. And I think if I walked at more quiet times and perhaps more frequently, maybe I might see a flash or slightly more out of the village itself. Partridges I have seen in Selborne a few times, but I'm not really expecting to see any this afternoon. Pheasants I see all the time. They are in the grounds. They are constantly trying to get themselves killed on Selborne Road. I think out of all the animals that Gilbert lists in this particular letter, pheasants are the one that I have a feeling that I will see. And many of them I really am not expecting to see, because I'm not sure that I have really ever seen them out and about in Selborne. And even Gilbert laments the decline of woodcocks and quails and landrakes in this letter, so I'm not holding my breath to see them, but wouldn't it be amazing if I did? And then the rest of the letter is about the villagers of Selborne, their living conditions, their occupations, and a very, very comprehensive list of baptisms and burials, dating from his grandfather's day as vicar of Selborne to Gilbert's time of writing, showing how much Gilbert was A, very, very much the clergyman, and B, a data nerd. Yeah, yeah, he loved a graph. Well, he loved a chart, and he loved a bit of data. He actually, in the letter, sort of bemoans the fact that his water level recordings, like his rainfall recordings, aren't really accurate enough to be able to really share in the book. That he hasn't really, although he does record it, isn't really recording it properly to be able to share the data there. But if you're ever interested in what the in those sort of figures in terms of burials and baptisms and populations in a rural 18th century village, do have a look at the Natural History of Selborne. It's an unlikely place to look, but Gilbert very succinctly notes down quite a lot of detail there to give you quite a good idea of the size of the village and sort of its quite robust population. So, yeah, I think I am going to release myself from my desk and go outside before it actually starts to rain again. Okay, I'll see you in a bit. The manor of Selborne, was it strictly looked after, with its kindly aspects and all its sloping coverts, would swarm with game. Even now hares, partridges and pheasants abound, and in the old days woodcocks were as plentiful. There were few quails, because they more affect open fields and enclosures. After harvest, some few landrails were seen. Right, so I have escaped the high street and I am currently walking down sort of a hollow lane, not quite in miniature, but a pretty good example. So it's the footpath that is opposite Gosling's Croft and sort of heads towards the corner of Gracious Street, and it is very much a hollow lane. You can see either side the banks are quite high, not quite the 16 to 18 feet that other hollow lanes have, but it gives you a kind of an idea of the sort of thing that Gilbert White is describing in his letters. And the other thing that I'm delighted to see is this. It's just kind of pretty, but it's sort of a good idea of what Gilbert White describes in the letter when he's talking about that in really, really wet weather, how the water pours from the farmland that's either side, and actually up there are agricultural fields that the water runs off, and then in really cold weather this would then freeze into icicles and be really, really sort of and the word he uses is grotesque, but I think he means not in a sort of like, oh, it's horrible to look at, but like really very dramatic to look at. And to be honest, with all the roots of the trees exposed, which is a big sort of hollow lane feature, it's you sort of get the idea of why Gilbert enjoyed walking through them and observing the flora of these lanes, but also why I think I just heard my first pheasant,
but also why these sort of paths would be so difficult for people that were travelling to navigate. Now, looking ahead of me, I'm very pleased that I have changed into my welly boots. So I will, I'm going to move on and get a bit further away from the sounds of the traffic, and hopefully find myself in the 18th century, or as near as we can get to it in 2026. So on we go. This is exciting. Feels like I'm being somehow mischievous by going for a walk when I could be in the office, but look at the sun. It's so exciting to be outside and it not be raining. Amazing. Okay, right. One thing I will say though is I do enjoy that Gilbert White in the letter does describe the air in Selborne as being quite moist, and that is definitely something that I am experiencing at the moment. Selborne is fairly moist, and it's kind of a shame actually that I'm having to spend so much time looking at my feet whilst I'm going on my walk today. I'm slightly worried that I'm going to stack it on camera, but hopefully that won't happen. I'm quite aware that now I'm a bit further on the road and I haven't been talking to myself for a little while, that I can hear the birds, and I went on a similar walk one of my days off, and I purposely walked along with my birdsong app open, because I'm not brilliant at recognising my birdsong, and I knew that today I would probably be talking more than listening. And what did we have on it? We had coal tits, blue tits, great tits, robins of course. We had tree creeper, which was really surprising. Well, not surprising because of the time of year, but more just because obviously my phone heard it, I didn't hear it, and I also really would have quite liked to have to see it, so I sort of felt like I'd missed out. And I jackdaws, thrush, wren, lots of things that I suppose you'd expect to hear. Wood pigeon along the walk, but it was really nice to do that. But I think for anybody who, like me, who is not particularly skilled in identifying birdsong, and it's a skill that I really want to try and develop this year, having an app that can help you with that, I think, is really helpful, and really opens your eyes as well to the different things that you can hear on your doorstep. I've stopped momentarily. We've got a very nice bit of sunken lane, and I can tell that we're also almost back in the village. And so I just wanted to take a moment before we are sort of back in the village properly, to talk a little bit about sort of my senses and sort of things that Gilbert talks about in the letter that I can perhaps try and notice. I've really been enjoying, as I think you can tell from my ramblings, the oh hello. The sort of the, like, all this, you know, these amazing tree formations and roots and the exposed stone, and the really sort of amazing sunken lanes in miniature. I mean, it must be about 7 foot high, this bank here, maybe 8, and this one probably more like 6 to 7, but the dappled sunlight, the bird song, the greenery as well. It's still winter as I'm speaking today, but in the garden the snowdrops are out, but even here, where there's not much flowering yet, but you can the greenery is sort of a sign of what's to come, and I really get the sense of Gilbert White poking around in these banks, looking at the ferns. In fact, I can see some now, and the mosses and the lichens and and just really finding the whole thing fascinating. And I wish that I could see with his eyes. And Gilbert White mentions the air, and I just feel really refreshed and really happy to be out and about. I agree that that Selborne has fresh and healthy air, and let's walk on. Let's head towards Gracious Street. You can also see what we were talking about last episode, which I haven't really touched on. I've caused a mass exodus over there. Sorry. About all the stone, and being able to see the different layers of stone. It's in, I think, the hollowed lanes particularly, that you get a sense of the freestone and the green stone and sandstone, all the different stones that June was talking about last episode. Right. So I'm back in the village. I've just come out of the lane, and now I'm on Gracious Street, which is the street that eventually sort of goes alongside Gilbert White's house. And most of the buildings on this street would have been here in Gilbert White's time, and he would have known the inhabitants. And I'm trying really hard not to show people's homes, but these are all places that Gilbert White would have known, and he would have known the inhabitants. As I mentioned before, the letter, Gilbert White goes into quite some detail about the people of Selborne and how poor the village was. He uses the word, "we are bound with poor," and their occupations. So the occupations that he lists are tree felling and barking, and working on hop farms. Hop picking during the harvest was particularly important, and during the winter months when they weren't either hop picking or weeding cornfields and things like that, it would be spinning wool, which interestingly they would then send to Alton, to the Quaker community in Alton, and there they would use it for a special type of corded cloth, which was very fashionable at the time. So yes, I think Gilbert's quite proud of the fact that although it's a very poor area at that time. It was a very industrious and very healthy village, as you can tell by the number of births exceeding burials. But I do think you have to keep in mind that that Selborne was, a poor village, and after Gilbert's death there was a workhouse in Selborne, which was then the scene for the 1830 Selborne riot, which was part of the swing riots. So, life was really difficult for the people of Selborne, and I do think it's interesting that Gilbert White felt that he needed to add so much data and so much detail about the people of Selborne in his thing. And I mean, the people of Selborne are as much part of the natural history of Selborne as the animals and the plants are, so in some ways it makes perfect sense. But it is intriguing that he goes into so much detail and adds so much data there. You wonder whether perhaps he was... we often talk about Gilbert White in being the kind of naturalist where... there's another pheasant. What a good crop of snowdrops coming up as well. That Gilbert White was a naturalist who, well, we call him the first ecologist because he looked at all life and could see how it was linked, and humankind was not a part of that. It was very much part of the great chain of nature, and so I think probably having the people in the book was just as important as a list of the mammals and birds and plants for its readers who, I mean, this is still really the introduction to the book, to get a proper idea of what this village was and what it was about and why it was so important. And Gilbert White was a community naturalist, and a lot of his observations and his diary entries talk about his neighbours helping him with his natural history. So I think it's quite special really that this book about nature features so much detail about the people, and we'll see that again and again as we get further into the book. So we're coming up quite close to the museum now, and I suppose I should finish and talk a little bit about what our Be More Gilbert is going to be about this episode. And I think it's actually to just get out there. We are now 6 episodes deep, and we've had so much fantastic advice from all of our guests about taking it slow and keeping journals and letting things grow wild. And I think so my advice, and this is as much to myself as it is to everybody else, is to actually try and do some. I mean, this has been a very short walk, but I'm definitely going to try and escape the museum more often. Oh look where we are. Because I think it's super important, and I spend an inordinate amount of time in Selborne, But really, so few of that is actually connecting with nature and connecting with Gilbert White on a, in a physical way, and following in his footsteps, rather than sitting at a desk and telling people what to do. So that's a slap on the wrist for me, and we're back. We're home. Interestingly, do you see this little triangle here? That would have been Gilbert White's front door. Not this one, that one.
The village stands in a sheltered spot, secured by the hanger from the strong westerly winds. The air is soft, but rather moist from the effluvia of so many trees, yet perfectly healthy and free from agues.
Right, so we're back in the quote-unquote warmth of the house to look at our object for the episode. And what I have chosen for this episode is this sketch, which has been accompanied by lots of sketches. These are by Edmund Hortnew, who was quite a prominent illustrator of the late 19th century and early 20th century, and he lent his pencil to illustrating the Natural History of Selborne. I think it's 1897, I want to say, although these sketches were done in 1898, so either I've got something wrong, or these were done after the fact, and he came back to Selborne to sketch these. So they're all different sketches of places around Selborne. So we've got Hartley Mordit and Headley, but this one is a rocky hollow lane near Norton, which is not very far from where we were walking today, and is one of the narrow lanes that Gilbert White talks about in his letter. So this was done on July the 1st, 1898, and it is a really lovely detailed sketch of the hollow lanes, and gives you an idea of what they would have looked like. And yeah, I thought it was a fitting addition to our little display that is ever growing behind me in the discovery room of all the different objects that we've talked about in the podcast.
The village of Selborne and the large hamlet of Oakhanger, with single farms and many scattered houses along the verge of the forest, contain upwards of 670 inhabitants. We abound with poor, many of whom are sober and industrious, and live comfortably in a good stone or brick cottages, which are glazed and have chambers above stairs. Mud buildings we have none. Thank you for listening to this slightly different episode. We are back in a fortnight to our usual programming with a discussion of perhaps Gilbert's favourite place to visit, Wilmer Forest. He mentions it a lot in the book, and this is our first proper visit. If you haven't already, please book your tickets for our Natural History Book Day on the 21st of March. We have the most brilliant nature writers coming along, and it would be a shame to miss out. As always, a big thank you to Sophia for editing this episode, and to you for supporting. Thank you so much.